Okay, I believe we are now live on YouTube. Welcome to our YouTube audience. I'm Carrie Donegan, and today's topic is health information that you can take to the bank. We've been reading the book 10% Human. I hope you're enjoying it. And there's a lot of information there, but just like most books that are primarily there to inform, the practical applications aren't there. And the takeaways that you need so that you can say, oh, well, that's great. Thanks so much for that information. But now what do I do with it? Today, we're going to do an episode on something that I think is going to be helpful because I'm going to talk to you about what you can do about it and how you can think of this information in terms that maybe are a little bit more familiar to you and less complex. So you don't have to go back to the book constantly or return to your notes constantly, that in your everyday walk of life, as you are going through and trying to make good health choices, it doesn't become an overwhelming, um, complicated and confusing situation. So one of the things I want to really, really emphasize, and something if it's brand new to you that we really want you to know right off the bat, is the fact that a calorie is not a calorie. And what do I mean by that? So everything we eat comes in different forms. It might be a fiber, a fat, a carbohydrate, or a protein. And all of those things are used by the body in a really different way. The other thing that we're eating a lot of now is what I'm going to call frankenfoods or fake foods. Some of them are fake estrogens, some of them are emulsifiers, some of them are chemically processed foods like enriched wheat. Where they strip the wheat of all of the nutrients and then they have to artificially infuse the wheat with actual nutrients. So if you look on a package and it says enriched wheat, then you go to the very bottom, you'll see what it's enriched with. And it gives you a whole list of synthetic vitamins. And we don't really want that. The word synthetic is something that's very difficult for your body to understand because it is not bioavailable. So there's kind of two things going on inside your body and inside your health when you are out there in the world. The first thing, in your body is created in a natural way for a natural environment. And yet we have created many different artificial environments. Now, we are built to survive. So even though we've created some artificial environments, your body is doing things to protect itself against those artificial things, which means that those artificial things will not necessarily kill you at the moment of contact, but over time can create chronic situations, including inflammation, pain, chronic diseases, disruptions, or actually changes in your body system so that your body is no longer running the way it's supposed to run. So when we talk about the different things that we consume, I'm going to put this whole category of what I would call like artificial foods, chemicals, plastics, fake hormones like fake estrogens, which, by the way, you get in things like medications and in water bottles. um, Different medications that you're absorbing through the water that you're drinking that you never even intended to absorb. There's a lot of birth control actually in the water that never gets filtered out, unless you have a really, really fine, sophisticated home system, which I don't think most people have. I mean, maybe my audience does, but I think for the average person, they're not thinking that the water that comes inside their house is not clean. They look at it in a glass and it looks very clear and they think, okay, my water is clean. But really, deep down inside, there are all these very small particles. Okay, so again, the four categories or the five categories that I want to talk about today are carbohydrates or sugars, proteins, fibers, fats, and then all this artificial stuff, okay, that we have to contend with and how it works. So, as you're eating and as you're making your food shopping choices, you need to understand how each of those works so that you understand exactly what you're doing, because a calorie isn't a calorie. So to simplify this, I thought I would go with an analogy. It's one of my favorite ways to explain a lot of complicated information. And for those of you who are science-based and feel like I've oversimplified things, I apologize. My intention is not to make something super complex sound easy. My intention and my expectation is to teach the person out there who just wants to know how to make good choices, to give them some background or some understanding of how to make those choices. So with that in mind, I want you to think of your liver, which is sort of the gateway of everything that happens in your body. The very large organ, it's a filtering organ, and it is one of those things that actually helps us store fat or create energy in your body. So I want you to think of your liver as a bank, all right? And that everything that goes into your body is like a currency, right? That you have to change into energy, because the whole point of eating is to live. Even though many of us, myself included, live to eat. I love food. I love to travel around the world. I love to try different things. I love to go out to eat. I love to eat at my friends' homes. I love to try every kind of food. So I may actually, unfortunately, fall into this category of I live to eat because I'm so excited about what the next thing I get to eat is. It really takes away the mission of food, which is you eat to live, right? So if we take the premise that we eat to live, just like we have money to buy things and we need a bank to store our treasure, right? So that it can be used in the future, or can it be exchanged for something else? I often put money in the bank so that I can pay a bill, right? It's not necessarily money that I'm going to save. It's money I'm going to use, but the bank does a really good job of transferring that money from my employer, who deposits the money, to my creditor, who takes the money because they provided me a product or a service. All right, so the same thing happens with your liver. If you think of those 5 things as different types of currency, when they come to the bank has to look at what the currency is and then either do something with it or transfer it or translate it in some way. So let's take the most simple thing in the world, and that is fructose or glucose. These are your carbohydrates, your sugars. Now, they come in 2 different forms. They come in a simple form and a complex form. And, you know, if you're really, really sick and you haven't eaten for weeks and you're on death's door, the number one thing you want is a simple carbohydrate. That's when you get like an IV glucose right into your veins, because you need that sugar to go into your body and start feeding it, right? Start working it. But most of us aren't at death's door. We haven't starved ourselves for months and months or weeks or whatever it is. And we have all kinds of money in the bank. Let's put it that way. All right. We're not depleted of everything. So glucose should not necessarily be our go-to currency when it comes to food. But just so you know, if our bank were a US bank, for example, glucose would be the American dollar. You walk up to the bank, they'll take the money right away, and they basically will do with it whatever you ask them to do, because it's easy. It doesn't take any processing. It doesn't need any confirmation. You can just use the US dollar in a US bank. All right, let's go to the next, a little bit more difficult thing, and that is a complex carbohydrate. Oh, and by the way, if you are consuming just simple carbohydrates, right? Let's say your diet is made up of just simple carbohydrates. These could be things from breads to pastas, and I mean just that. So there's no fats involved, there's no vegetables involved. You're literally just eating what a lot of people refer to as white food, you know, just really, really highly processed, simple sugars, you know, white sugar, white flour, that kind of thing. That is just going to get absorbed and processed in your body, and you're done. Whatever energy you need, it just uses right away. Whatever energy you don't need, it gets stored. So it's super easy for you to convert simple sugars into fat, because do you really know how much energy you need at that moment? I don't. I mean, how could you possibly know? It's not like we have a gas tank or a meter, or we have a checking account where we can look and see how much money we need. We just eat and we hope that our body uses it when it needs it. So your body has to be the banker, the smart one, to figure out what needs to happen next. So for a lot of us who eat a high simple carbohydrate diet, if you're eating a lot of fast foods, processed foods, again, white sugar, white flour foods, the crackers, the cookies, the breads, the pastas, those kinds of things, you're probably storing a lot of it as fat. So what happens is you put all this money in the bank and the banker says, well, you only need a few dollars to pay off your debt, whatever it is. The rest of it we're going to store in the bank, which may sound good when it comes to money, but when it comes to carbohydrates, not so great to store that as fat because we gain weight. It also means that it could clog our arteries and lead to heart disease. And it also means that it slows down your immune system because when your body has a lot of insulin production, which is what happens when we get a lot of carbohydrates, we don't have the capacity to fight illnesses, and it can even make it difficult for us to sleep. So a straight carbohydrate diet, simple, not healthy on your body at all, and it's going to lead to some serious health problems. Now, let's say you have a complex carbohydrate. These can be actually really good. These are things like sweet potatoes and squash and fruits and, fresh fruits. I'm not talking about things in a can that have been soaked in syrup. I'm just talking about like vine ripe from the tree. Those carbohydrates are actually really good for you. I want you to think of those as actually writing a check. Okay. So a complex carbohydrate is almost as good as cash, right? So it's going to hit your body. It's not that hard to translate, but it has to be authenticated, right? It goes through a certain process where it actually has to be thought about and transferred in a more thoughtful way, which means that the process of getting the energy out of that complex carbohydrate is going to be slower, right? You have to wait for a check to clear. It doesn't go automatically the way cash does. And the good thing about slowing down the system means that your body needs to actually produce more energy for that process to happen, just like the bank has to do more work to process your check. Anytime your body has to work a little harder and a little bit smarter, it's going to actually work in your favor because it's not just going to automatically get stored. It's not automatically going to spike insulin. It's in a very out of control way. And remember, when insulin goes up, cortisol goes up, which is our stress hormone, and our stress hormone, when it's not supposed to be there, can do a lot of damage to your body. So the idea is to keep insulin nice and quiet and only there when we need it. And using a complex carbohydrate is going to be better. Remember, the complex carbohydrate is like a check, right? It takes a little bit of time to process, whereas a simple carbohydrate is like cash. All right, moving on. Now we're going to talk about protein. Protein is like you have another high valued currency in the world compared to the dollar. So I'm going to use the euro as an example. Think of your proteins as the euro. They have high value. And yet, when you go to an American bank with the euro, you're going to have to pay a fee to have that money transferred right into American dollars, because they're not just going to give you an even exchange, right? To exchange money, there has to be some kind of fee taken out. All right, so let's talk about proteins. Proteins, when we eat them, go two places. If you are building muscle, right? Let's say you're at the gym and you're lifting weights and you're building muscle. When you eat that protein, just like when you take those American dollars and you exchange them for euros, that process goes right into the muscle. And guess what? You're utilizing that energy to build muscle, doesn't get stored as fat, and muscle actually takes more energy to run. So you're actually, in a way, at a deficit, an energy deficit, when you're eating a protein calorie, because it takes a lot more for it to actually make that exchange. If you have the ability to suck that into your muscle, that's great. That means that you're building up your body. But let's say you're not a bodybuilder, you don't work out, or you don't lift anything, and you still eat protein. What happens? Well, you still have to go to the bank with those euros and have them exchanged for American dollars. And like I said, it's going to take a fee, right? And it's going to take some time and effort. So here's what happens with the protein. The protein then goes to the liver, and the liver has to do that exchange. And in that process of the exchange, you're going to lose some of the calories because it takes some time. Just like when you go to a bank and you give euros to an American bank and you want US dollars back, right? You want that energy back, you are going to have to pay a fee. So a fee is always paid with protein, whereas a fee is not paid with a carbohydrate, whether it's simple or complex. So remember, your carbohydrates, simple, cash. Carbohydrates, complex, checks. Proteins, you're exchanging a high valued currency for another high valued currency, okay? There's a fee involved, but you still have the value, and you may actually have to lose some of the energy in the process, which maybe from a financial standpoint isn't great because who wants to pay fees? But from a physiological standpoint, it's wonderful because building muscle is always a good thing. Makes you strong, keeps your bones together, makes you work harder to get at your energy, which means you might have to burn some fats to do it. And if you're not building muscle, it's okay anyway, because proteins just take more work to break down to get to that energy, which is overall a workout for your body. So proteins just in their own nature are a workout in and of itself. All right, now let's get to fats, because most people have bought the lie that fats make you fat. And actually, omega-3s, for example, are the most valuable thing that you can bring into the bank. So I'm going to talk about fats as if you're bringing in treasure. Maybe you have a watch collection or a jewelry collection or a painting collection, something that you want to put in a vault, right? Or that you want to have the bank purchase or exchange. And it's a good, and it has to be analyzed. So this is where fats become super tricky because there's lots of fats on the market. Some of them are authentic and super valuable, like omega-3s, and some of them are fakes, right? Like trans fats. And some of them are cheap fats, right? Like some seed oils. And some of them look good. They look authentic on the outside. Maybe they're like costume jewelry, looks pretty, right? But it's not a real diamond. It's not a real sapphire. And that could be something like, a fake olive oil. Olive oil is good, but only if it's genuine, right? Diamonds are great, but they're only really worth something if they're actual diamonds, right? And they're not cubic zirconia, something like that. So your fats are your treasure. But if you don't have authentic treasure, you can't do things like build your brain, make your arteries and your veins strong, improve your eyesight, okay? Create a soft, supple skin, produce strong hair, nails, and skin, right? All of this stuff comes from really good omega-3s. We need those omega-3s, but we need them to be genuine, just like our treasure. Now, let's talk about those fake fats again, these trans fats. How do I know if I have a real fat or a fake fat? That's a good question, all right? So none of us, I think, are going out there and putting our good money into fine jewels to buy fakes, right? We want to go to a jeweler that we know, that we trust, that other people have authenticated, right? That we have some kind of understanding. So when it comes to buying fats, you really want to know your source, and you want to make sure that they are trusted brand. So for example, I take the omegas from doTERRA because I trust them, because they're verified, because they're tested, right? It's a certified, pure, tested grade of product. Oops, I'm losing my energy right on my computer, so I have to plug in. But we will continue talking about this. So you also want to make sure that you're not buying cheap things from your grocery store, because guess what? They probably are not authentic because fats are expensive. All right. So if you are buying something super cheap, you may want to try to verify it and make sure that you're not buying something fake or diluted or adulterated. Okay, that's really important. It's also important when it comes to our essential oils, the same kind of thing. You know, if it's too good to be true, it's probably a lie. So in that case, what I would do is really do your research on finding good omega-3 oils. So good fish oils, like I said, doTERRA, I trust. Good virgin olive oils, extra virgin olive oils are really, really good for you. You don't have to buy the most expensive brands. It's not about the fancy container. It's about the source. Do you trust the source? Do your research. I like coconut oil, same thing. Do your research. Avocado oil. Stay away from things like canola oil. And the worst of the worst is anything that's listed as partially hydrogenized. So anything that goes through a hydrogenal process. What happens is they change it to such a degree that bacteria can no longer break it down. So guess what? If it can't be broken down on the outside world, it also can't be broken down on the inside world. And remember, if you can't break down your food into energy, then there is no point in eating it. All right. If you cannot break food into energy, the sole reason that we eat, then there is no good reason to eat it. Now, here's the part where the microbiome comes in. Your microbiome, which is bigger than you, right? You're 10% human, 90% microbiome. That living microorganism that weighs 6 pounds that you can't see is hungry. And if it's not fed properly, it will die. And it is the number one important thing that runs your whole body. So if you're eating a lot of trans fats, and remember, your microbiome is mostly bacteria. So if bacteria can't eat these trans fats, and in fact, they die from the trans fats, then what are we doing to our microbiome with the trans fats? We're killing our microbiome, and we're taking away its ability to do its job. So the bank knows that. So when you bring trans fats to the bank, they automatically get stored. And whatever the microbiome comes into contact with, the microbiome will start to die. And so you end up, when you go to use this, right, when you want to sell your treasure, it's worth nothing. And in fact, you may have spent really, really good money on something that has no value to you. So you've actually lost money. And in this case, you've lost your health. Now, the good news is we can always switch and start to invest in healthy omega-3s and in good fats. Even butter, lard, things that come from animals, all those fats are really, really good for us. Despite everything that you've heard, the most important thing I want to share with you today is the fact that if it comes from nature, I'm 100% confident that it's going to be good for you, as well, as long as you eat it in the right amounts and in moderation, because whatever you don't need, you store, right? Even if it's good. And if it is processed, if it's a chemical, if it, all of those kinds of things, it is over time doing damage to your body. It is like you're making your body up of a whole bunch of, basically fake treasure. And that's not going to be anything that you can use. So it's really, really important that we understand all foods are not equal. All foods can provide energy. Fake foods cannot provide energy. They can only do harm. And because your body is there to protect you, it is going to hold off as much as it possibly can. But at some point, things do break down. Now we're seeing that breakdown earlier and earlier in life because young people are being introduced to higher amounts of chemically laden and artificial foods than we've had in the past, right? Your grandparents didn't even have a chance to eat some of these foods. They didn't exist. So they didn't have these health issues until maybe they started to consume these foods much later in life. So it's a question of how much have you eaten and how have they built up? And then it's a question of stopping it, replacing it for something healthier, and then trying to get rid of it. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to restore your body just to close today so that you understand how to get your affairs in order. And my analogy here would be like, let's say you're seriously in debt. All right. You go to the bank and you owe everyone in the world because what you thought was valuable wasn't valuable, or you overspent, right? We've all been there. I've gained and lost 50 pounds several times in my life. Over the last year, I've lost 22 pounds. All right. Think of that as my debt. I was 22 pounds, in debt, and I had to pay off the debt, which means I had to lose that weight that wasn't serving me. And then I had to build up my health, which is like building up your credit, if that makes sense, right? So restoring your financial health, very similar to restoring your physical health. So what can you do? The first thing and the most important thing you can do is actually get real. So make sure everything you're eating is as real and as natural as possible. Even if you are so confused that the only thing you know how to eat are things that right, are in their original form. Fruits, vegetables, fresh, obviously, meats. Like even if you don't want to eat cheese because you think of it as a processed food, that's fine. If that's where you're going to start, just to figure out what to eat. And then you can slowly go back to eating the way we used to and start taking whole food ingredients and turning them into delicious dishes. But the most important thing to remember is that you want to be as natural as possible. The second thing that's really important is you want to increase the fiber in your diet. I will bet that 99% of us do not eat enough fiber in our diets, and it should be fiber first. So you can easily go with the doTERRA fiber before everything that you eat. That's fine. Or you can learn about high fiber foods like apples, pears, avocados. Look up the list. It's pretty easy to look at. And make sure you feed first with fiber, because that's going to feed your microbiome, and it's also going to start healing some of the problems that may have been caused by some of these other issues. After that, you want to go with those things that are high value but hard to exchange, right? Our proteins. Those are our euros, right? So go with those proteins after you've eaten your fiber and allow the proteins to actually use energy to get to energy, because then you're not going to have excess weight, and you're also going to get all your body systems running at a really high level doing their job. If you want, after all of that, if you're still hungry and you want to have some complex carbohydrates or even simple carbohydrates, it's okay. But they have to come at the end, right? Because you don't spend your cash unless you have to. So if you spend it at the beginning, you're going to use way too much cash, right? Start to actually use things in the way that actually serves your body better, because the biggest lie out there, according to Robert Lustig, and I agree with him, Dr. Robert Lustig, I should say, the author of Metabolical, is that a calorie is a calorie, because a calorie is not a calorie. And the way we eat is as important as how much we eat. All right. So I hope this information has been helpful to you. Please go run with it, and I'll see you next time.